Have you ever noticed how, almost overnight, many African nations seem to be turning their legal systems against homosexuality? From Uganda to Ghana, from Mali to Nigeria, laws are appearing one after another, each carrying harsh punishments. And now, even Burkina Faso, a country once seen as an exception on the continent, has just flipped the script. Its transitional parliament voted unanimously to criminalize same-sex relations, with prison terms of up to 5 years, heavy fines, and even deportation for foreigners. But the question is, why now? Why does this feel less like isolated events and more like a continental wave? For more than 6 decades, Burkina Faso occupied a rare position. When the country gained independence from France in 1960, it did not inherit the restrictive colonial codes against homosexuality. While its neighbors criminalized same-sex acts, Burkina Faso remained silent. That silence was not freedom. Society rooted in religion and tradition strongly disapproved, but the absence of legal punishment made the country stand out on the African map. People could not openly live as couples, but at least they could not be imprisoned simply for who they were. For 60 years, that silence held. Then suddenly, in 2024, everything began to change. Under the leadership of Captain Ibrahim Traore, the transitional government introduced a draft amendment that, for the first time in the nation's history, defined homosexuality as a crime. 1 year later, in September 2025, Parliament made it official. The silence had ended. Burkina Faso now stood with the majority of African countries, informally outlawing homosexuality. Overnight, the neutral position was erased, replaced by a clear stance that reflects not global liberal norms, but the deeply rooted religious and cultural values of Burkinabe society. And this raises a profound question. Is this really about family values, or is it about something larger? About sovereignty, about independence, about rejecting the pressure of outsiders? Has Burkina Faso chosen to defend its culture, or is it isolating itself from the world? When we look back at Burkina Faso's legal history, the shift that occurred in 2025 seems almost unbelievable. For more than 60 years, homosexuality was not illegal in the country. That does not mean it was accepted. Far from it. Social conservatism, shaped by Islam, Christianity, and traditional beliefs, kept the topic taboo. Yet the absence of a law criminalizing same-sex relations made Burkina Faso a rare outlier in Africa, where the vast majority of states had inherited or introduced such prohibitions. This unusual position dated back to independence. In 1960, when Burkina Faso, then Upper Volta, freed itself from France, its new legal system did not include the anti-homosexuality codes that were common in former British colonies. For decades, this omission created what could be called a legal silence. Same-sex couples did not have rights, nor did they enjoy social recognition, but the state did not send them to prison either. In practice, people lived discreetly, and the matter was largely avoided in public debate. That silence itself was significant. It suggested that the state did not need to intrude into private lives on this issue. But silence is fragile. In 2022, Captain Ibrahim Traore seized power in a military coup, promising to restore security and sovereignty in a country ravaged by insurgencies and disillusioned with foreign interference. His government quickly moved to assert independence not only in military and economic affairs, but also in cultural and moral questions. This is where the turning point began. In early 2024, the transitional government proposed an amendment to the Family Code. For the first time in the nation's history, the legal text explicitly defined homosexuality as a criminal offense. The draft shocked some observers who had long pointed to Burkina Faso as a symbol of tolerance, but within the country, the move was not widely contested. In fact, it reflected sentiments already deeply held in society, where more than 90% of the population belongs to a religious community and where moral conservatism remains strong. By September 2025, the draft had become law. The transitional parliament voted unanimously to criminalize homosexual acts. Not a single voice opposed the measure. The penalties were clear and severe: 2 to 5 years in prison, significant fines, and deportation for foreigners caught in same-sex relations. Justice Minister Edaso Rodrigue Baya defended the law with simple, resonant language, calling it necessary to protect society from bizarre behavior. His words echoed the language used in mosques, churches, and family discussions across the country. The passage of the law represented more than just a legal update. It marked the end of a 60-year experiment in silence. Burkina Faso, once a neutral ground, had now chosen a side. This side aligned it with the vast majority of African nations, many of which had not only criminalized homosexuality, but were actively reinforcing such laws. In neighboring Mali, another junta-led government had already imposed restrictions. Uganda had gone even further, passing one of the harshest anti-LGBT laws in the world, including the death penalty in certain cases. Ghana's parliament had been debating its own bill. Nigeria had enforced prohibitions for years. In this context, Burkina Faso's decision no longer appeared isolated. It was part of a continental movement. The symbolism of a unanimous vote should not be underestimated. In a transitional parliament where political diversity is limited, consensus often reflects broader social mood rather than mere political alignment. Lawmakers knew they were responding to what the majority of citizens already believed, that homosexuality was incompatible with cultural and religious values. For many Burkinabé, this was not about restricting freedom, but about defending the moral fabric of society. Still, the abrupt reversal carried powerful consequences. It transformed Burkina Faso's image from one of cautious neutrality into one of active enforcement. It also brought the country into direct confrontation with global human rights standards. International organizations and Western governments quickly took note, warning of potential economic and diplomatic consequences. For a country already battling insecurity and poverty, such risks were not small. Yet within Burkina Faso, the mood was different. There was pride in asserting cultural sovereignty, pride in saying, "We make our own laws." Thus, the law of 2025 was more than a statute. It was a declaration. Burkina Faso had chosen to redefine its identity in line with its cultural roots and in solidarity with other African nations resisting outside influence. What began as silence had ended in a loud and unmistakable statement. The turning point came in September 2025. In a single session, Burkina Faso's transitional parliament voted unanimously to criminalize homosexuality. There was no hesitation, no abstention, no opposition. The law passed with full consensus, prescribing 2 to 5 years of imprisonment, fines, and the deportation of foreigners involved in same-sex relations. Overnight, what had once been tolerated in silence became an act punishable by law. This moment represented the climax of a slow but decisive shift. For decades, the state had refrained from intervening in private matters, even as society frowned upon homosexuality. Now the silence was shattered. The Justice Minister, Edson Rodrigues Baya, framed the decision as a moral necessity, to protect society from bizarre behavior. His words carried weight, not because they introduced a new idea, but because they reflected a vocabulary already embedded in the daily lives of Burkinabe families. In mosques, churches, and community gatherings, homosexuality was often described in exactly these terms. The minister's language resonated with the people, giving political legitimacy to what many already believed. The unanimity of the vote itself was symbolic. It was not just a legal measure, it was a national statement. By criminalizing homosexuality, Burkina Faso declared that it stood firmly with its cultural and religious traditions and against what it saw as foreign pressure to adopt Western liberal values. The message was clear: morality would be defined at home, not abroad. Inside Burkina Faso, the response was largely supportive. Religious leaders praised the government for defending the sacred order of the family. Community elders interpreted the law as a safeguard for social harmony. For many ordinary citizens, the law confirmed what they had always felt, that leaders were finally listening to their moral instincts. Ibrahim Traore, already celebrated for his defiance of France and his calls for sovereignty, gained further credibility as a leader who aligned politics with the cultural pulse of his people. Yet beneath the approval, some quieter voices raised concerns. Human rights activists within the country, though small in number, warned that the law would deepen fear and stigmatization. They worried about its impact on young people, especially in urban areas where global ideas circulate more freely. But in a society where public opinion was overwhelmingly conservative, these concerns found little space. The dominant emotion was not fear of repression, it was pride in asserting independence. Outside Burkina Faso, the response was very different. Human rights organizations condemned the law, calling it a violation of fundamental freedoms. The United Nations expressed deep concern, while the World Bank and other financial institutions signaled that aid and investment could be affected. Western governments, particularly in Europe and North America, criticized the move as a step backward for human rights. Le Burkina Faso, ancienne colonie française, se trouve dans une situation particulièrement difficile. Les relations avec Ouagadougou se sont fortement détériorées sous Traoré qui a expulsé les troupes françaises et accusé Paris d'ingérence dans les affaires africaines. La nouvelle loi renforce l'idée selon laquelle le Burkina Faso cherche délibérément à se distancer de l'influence française, non seulement sur le plan militaire et économique, mais aussi sur le plan culturel. The contrast between domestic approval and international condemnation revealed the deeper tension at the heart of the decision. For Burkina Faso, this was not just about regulating private behavior, it was about sovereignty. By criminalizing homosexuality, the country was not only reflecting the moral compass of its citizens, it was also sending a message to the world: we will not be told what to believe. Burkina Faso's move did not occur in isolation. Across Africa, similar laws were either passed or debated. Uganda had already stunned the world with one of the harshest anti-LGBT legislations, including the death penalty for what it called aggravated homosexuality. Ghana's parliament continued to push forward its own bill. Nigeria had long enforced strict prohibitions. Mali, Burkina Faso's close ally in the Sahel, had already adopted restrictions under its military junta. In this broader context, Burkina Faso's decision appeared less like an anomaly and more like part of a continental wave. Each country acted within its own history and culture, but together they formed a pattern, a rejection of Western norms, a reaffirmation of African cultural sovereignty. For leaders like Traore, aligning with this wave was not just about lawmaking, it was about joining a movement of defiance against outside pressure. The emotional climax of the law's passage lay in its symbolism. For many Burkinabés, the law was not primarily about punishing individuals. It was about defending identity. It was about drawing a line that separated their society from what they saw as foreign moral interference. In villages and cities alike, the law was celebrated as a declaration of self-respect, a bold move in an era when Africa increasingly seeks to speak with its own voice. And yet, this triumph carried risks. The clash between domestic pride and international disapproval set the stage for future conflicts, economic, diplomatic, and cultural. Burkina Faso had made its choice, but whether that choice would strengthen or weaken the nation remained uncertain. The passage of Burkina Faso's anti-homosexuality law was not merely a symbolic act. It carried immediate and long-term consequences, both for the country's internal social fabric and for its fragile political landscape. At the level of everyday life, the law deepened the sense of cultural certainty for many Burkinabe citizens. In a society where over 90% of people identify with a religion, predominantly Islam and Christianity, moral norms are expected to be reflected in state policies. For religious leaders, the unanimous vote represented a triumph. Imams and pastors alike praised the government for aligning with divine law and protecting the family. In rural communities where tradition and collective identity weigh heavily, the law was received as an affirmation of long-held values. Elders argued that morality is not an individual choice but a collective responsibility, one that ensures harmony with ancestors, community, and God. For them, criminalization was not repression, it was a safeguard. But beneath this dominant narrative, civil society faced new challenges. Human rights groups warned that the law would intensify stigma against LGBT individuals, pushing them further into hiding. The fear of arrest, fines, or deportation for foreigners created an atmosphere of fear and silence. For young Burkinabe who might feel different from societal norms, the law became a barrier to expression, deepening isolation and anxiety. Although these voices remained marginal in public debate, they highlighted the hidden human cost of the legislation. Politically, the law strengthened the authority of Captain Ibrahim Traore. Since seizing power in 2022, Traore had sought to legitimize his rule by presenting himself as the defender of sovereignty, against terrorism, against foreign domination, and now against cultural interference. By aligning the state with the moral instincts of its citizens, he consolidated his position as a leader who listens to the people rather than bowing to Western expectations. This consolidation was vital for a government still facing enormous challenges: violent insurgencies in the Sahel, widespread poverty, and fragile institutions. In such a context, passing a law that unites public opinion was politically advantageous.